have you ever noticed something strange about the kindest people in the world? The ones who always understand everyone, forgive everyone, help everyone, and somehow still end up feeling empty inside? People call them empaths, sensitive souls, deep feelers, human healers. But what if I told you most empaths were never taught how to love themselves? What if the empath is just the child who learned that being selfish was dangerous? Think about that. Because some children grow up learning, my feelings matter too, but others grow up learning something far darker. Keep everyone happy or lose love, and that is where the empath is born. Not from magic, not from spiritual gifts, but from survival. A child walks into a room and instantly reads the energy. Is dad angry today? Is mom sad again? Should I stay quiet? Should I smile? Should I become invisible? That child becomes emotionally hyper-aware, not because they want to, because they have to. They learn that peace in the house depends on them, so they become easy, helpful, understanding, mature beyond their years, and everyone praises them for it. Such a good child, so caring, so selfless, nobody notices. The terrifying truth underneath, that child never learned who they are, only who everyone else needed them to be. Some children do not grow up learning how to be themselves. They grow up learning how to survive people. Before they learn math, before they learn confidence, before they even understand their own emotions, they become experts at reading the emotions of everyone else. A small child walks into the kitchen and instantly feels the tension in the air. Nobody says anything, but they already know something is wrong. The silence feels dangerous. The mood feels heavy. The energy feels sharp. And without realizing it, the child begins adapting. Maybe they become quieter. Maybe they become funnier. Maybe they become easier to manage. Maybe they stop expressing needs completely. Not because that is their personality, because they learned that other people's emotions decide whether they feel safe or unsafe. This is how many empaths are created. Not from spirituality, not from mystery, from emotional survival. People think empaths are simply born caring. No. Many empaths were children who had no choice except becoming emotionally alert every second of the day. They learned how to detect disappointment before it exploded. They learned how to sense anger before it arrived. They learned how to comfort adults who were supposed to comfort them. And slowly, their nervous system transformed into a radar for human emotions. That child became emotionally intelligent too early. But there is a dark side to that kind of intelligence. Because while other children were learning how to express themselves, the empath was learning how to suppress themselves. They became the good kid, the easy kid, the mature one. But sometimes a child becomes mature because childhood was never emotionally safe enough for innocence. Think about how heartbreaking that is. A child who feels responsible for everyone's peace grows up believing love is something you must work for. They start believing, if everyone else is okay, then maybe I'll be okay too, so they become caretakers before they even understand their own pain. And adults praise this behavior constantly. You're so understanding, you're so thoughtful, you're so different from other kids, but nobody asks the deeper question. Why does this child feel responsible for everyone else's emotions? Because children are not supposed to carry emotional burdens that belong to adults. Yet many empaths spent childhood walking on emotional eggshells. Every sound mattered. Every facial expression mattered. Every shift in tone mattered. They became emotional detectives. Not because they were gifted, because unpredictability trained them to stay alert. And years later, people call them highly sensitive, but sensitivity is often the scar left behind by emotional instability. The empath learned very young that being selfish could cost them connection. So they stopped asking for too much, stopped complaining, stopped taking up space. Some empaths were ignored when they cried. Some were shamed for expressing anger. Some were told they were dramatic. Some were only loved when they were useful. That changes a child forever. Because children naturally believe everything is their fault. If love feels conditional, they assume they must become better to deserve it. So they become pleasers, performers, peacemakers, and eventually they lose touch with their authentic self completely. That is why many empaths struggle to answer simple questions later in life. What do you want? What makes you happy? What do you need? Because for years their identity revolved around everybody else. Their survival depended on understanding others better than understanding themselves. And people mistake this wound for kindness. But there is a painful difference between genuine kindness and trauma-trained selflessness. One comes from love. The other comes from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of conflict. Fear of abandonment. Fear of becoming unwanted. Many empaths are terrified of disappointing people because somewhere deep inside them still lives the child who believed rejection meant danger. So they over-explain, overgive, over-forgive, even when it destroys them. And the saddest part is this: most empaths do not even realize how much pain they carry, because they became so focused on understanding everyone else's emotions that they disconnected from their own. They know when you are hurting instantly, but when they are hurting, they minimize it. It's not a big deal. I'm probably overreacting. People have it worse. That is not emotional health. That is emotional conditioning. The empath was trained to believe their pain should always come second, and this creates adults who look strong on the outside but feel invisible on the inside. Adults who constantly feel emotionally exhausted. Adults who attract narcissists and emotional manipulators. Adults who struggle to say no without guilt eating them alive, because the child inside them still believes, if I stop giving people what they need, they may stop loving me, so they become shapeshifters. Different personality for different people. Different energy for different rooms. Different version of themselves depending on who needs them. And eventually they become strangers to themselves. Imagine living your whole life deeply connected to everyone else, but disconnected from you. That is the hidden loneliness of the empath. People feel understood by them constantly, but very few people truly understand them, because empaths often hide their deepest wounds behind compassion. They become the therapist friend, the listener, the emotionally available one, while silently carrying years of unmet emotional needs themselves, and society romanticizes this. People say empaths are beautiful souls, but nobody talks about how many empaths are actually wounded children, trapped inside adult bodies, still trying to earn the love they should have received freely. That is why they struggle with boundaries. Because boundaries feel selfish to someone who was trained to prioritize everyone else first. The moment they choose themselves, guilt appears. The moment they say no, anxiety appears. The moment they protect their peace, they feel like they are hurting people. Not because they are selfish, because they were conditioned to associate self-sacrifice with love. And toxic people love this type of person, because empaths tolerate what healthy people would walk away from. They excuse disrespect. They over-understand bad behavior. They stay loyal long after being emotionally drained. Why? Because deep down they still hope that if they love hard enough, someone will finally love them the same way back. But healing begins when the empath realizes something life-changing. Their sensitivity was never weakness. It was adaptation. Their hyper-awareness was survival. Their people-pleasing was protection. Their emotional intelligence was built inside environments where they had to read people carefully just to feel safe. And once they understand this, everything changes. Because now they stop blaming themselves for being too sensitive. They finally see the truth. The empath was never weak. The empath was a child who learned too early that love could disappear the moment they stopped taking care of everyone else. The empath does not destroy themselves all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. One sacrifice at a time. One swallowed emotion at a time. One more chance. One more excuse. One more night pretending they are okay when they are emotionally collapsing inside. That is the danger of empathy without boundaries. It looks beautiful from the outside, but inside, it becomes self-erasure. Because empaths are taught that love means understanding everyone no matter how badly they hurt you. So they stay patient with disrespect, patient with neglect, patient with neglect, patient with emotional abuse. And the world applauds them for having a good heart. But nobody warns them that a good heart without boundaries becomes a target. Toxic people do not search for strong boundaries. They search for endless understanding. And empaths give it, again, and again, and again, even when their soul is screaming for rest, because many We empaths secretly believe their value comes from how much pain they can tolerate for others. Read that carefully. Not how loved they are, not how respected they are, but how much they can endure without leaving. That belief destroys lives. Because the empath starts confusing suffering with loyalty. They think staying through mistreatment makes them special. They think overgiving proves love. They think sacrificing themselves makes relationships deeper. But real love never asks someone to disappear to keep the relationship alive. And yet empaths disappear every day. A little less honesty, a little less self-respect, a little less energy, a little less identity. Until eventually they wake up one morning and realize they have spent years emotionally feeding people who never truly poured back into them. That realization breaks something inside them. Because empaths love deeply, not casually. When they care about someone, they carry that person emotionally. They remember your pain, your insecurities, your struggles, your trauma. And they treat those things gently. But the tragedy is that many empaths expect others to love them with the same emotional depth they give naturally. And most people do not. So the empath keeps overgiving, hoping one day somebody will finally reciprocate fully. But users do not reward endless giving. They consume it. And this is why empaths often feel emotionally exhausted around certain people but guilty for pulling away from them. Because toxic relationships train empaths to feel responsible for emotions that are not theirs to carry. If someone is angry, the empath feels responsible. If someone withdraws, the empath panics. If someone is hurting, the empath abandons themselves to fix it. And over time, their entire emotional world becomes centered around managing other people's feelings. That is not love anymore. That is emotional captivity. The empath becomes so focused on protecting everyone else from discomfort that they slowly become strangers to their own needs. They stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "How do I keep everyone else okay?" That mindset destroys self-worth quietly, because eventually the empath begins believing their emotions are inconvenient. Their needs feel heavy. Their boundaries feel cruel. Their exhaustion feels selfish. So they keep giving even when they are empty. And empty people attract danger. We are relationships. Because manipulators can sense who has weak boundaries instantly. They notice who struggles to say no, who over-explains themselves, who forgives too quickly, who stays after repeated disrespect. And empaths often become magnets for these people because their compassion overrides their self-protection. They see potential instead of patterns, pain instead of manipulation, brokenness instead of accountability. So they stay longer than they should. They keep understanding behavior that should never be tolerated, because empaths fear becoming cold. But what they do not realize is this: protecting yourself is not cold. Having standards is not cruel. Walking away from emotional damage is not selfish. But many empaths were conditioned to believe boundaries hurt people. So every time they try to protect themselves, guilt attacks them, even when they are being mistreated. That is how deep the conditioning goes. Some empaths apologize while explaining why they deserve basic respect. Imagine how heartbreaking that is. A human being feeling guilty for asking not to be emotionally destroyed. And because empaths absorb emotions deeply, toxic environments affect them intensely. Why? One emotionally draining relationship can consume their entire nervous system. They lose sleep, overthink constantly, replay conversations for hours, carry invisible emotional weight every single day. And most people around them never even notice, because empaths are masters at hiding pain. They smile while emotionally drowning. They comfort others while secretly needing comfort themselves. And the scariest part is that many empaths do not even realize they are abandoning themselves because self-abandonment feels normal to them. It feels familiar. Childhood taught them that love required sacrifice. So adulthood repeats the same pattern in different forms. They become the friend who always listens but never feels heard, the partner who gives everything but receives crumbs emotionally, the family member who carries everyone's problems while silently collapsing inside, and eventually resentment begins growing underneath their kindness. Not because they are bad people, because human beings cannot endlessly pour from an empty soul. Sooner or later, the emotional debt catches up. And many empaths reach a breaking point where they suddenly withdraw from everyone. People call it going cold, but often it is emotional survival finally activating, because there comes a moment when the empath realizes something terrifying. I have spent my whole life making sure others feel loved while feeling emotionally neglected myself. That truth changes everything. It forces the empath to confront the painful reality that empathy without boundaries is not noble. It is dangerous. Because if your kindness destroys your mental health, it is no longer kindness toward yourself. And no healthy relationship should require self-betrayal to survive. But empaths betray themselves constantly. They silence intuition to avoid conflict, ignore red flags to avoid hurting feelings, stay loyal to people who continuously drain them. And every time they ignore their own inner voice, they teach themselves that their emotional safety matters less than everyone else's comfort. That is the root of self-destruction. Not one dramatic moment, repeated self-abandonment. The empath says yes when they want to say no, stays when they need to leave, forgives when they are deeply wounded, understands people who never try understanding them back, and slowly their soul becomes exhausted from carrying emotion. Our weight that was never theirs. This is why boundaries are not selfish for empaths. They are survival. Boundaries protect sensitive people from becoming emotional dumping grounds for the world. Without boundaries, empathy turns into absorption, and absorbed pain eventually becomes emotional burnout. A healed empath understands something powerful. I can love you without sacrificing myself for you. That sentence terrifies toxic people, because manipulators depend on unlimited access to your compassion. The moment the empath develops boundaries, everything changes. Now they notice disrespect faster. Now they stop chasing emotionally unavailable people. Now they stop apologizing for having needs. Now they stop confusing guilt with love. And for the first time in their life, they realize peace feels unfamiliar because chaos was normalized for so long. But peace is not boring. Peace is what the empath deserved all along. Not relationships that drain them. Not connections built on emotional exhaustion. Not love that requires constant self-sacrifice. Because the empath was never meant to become everybody's emotional home while remaining homeless inside themselves. The empath's healing do. It's not begin when the world changes. It begins the moment they stop abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable. That moment feels terrifying at first. Because for most of their life, the empath was taught directly or indirectly that choosing themselves was dangerous. Dangerous for relationships. Dangerous for love. Dangerous for acceptance. So every time they tried to protect their peace, guilt attacked them. Every time they said no, anxiety followed. Every time they prioritized themselves, they felt selfish, not because they were selfish, because they were conditioned to feel responsible for everyone else's emotional comfort. And healing starts when the empath finally sees the truth. They were never responsible for carrying everyone. That realization shakes the soul. Because many empaths built their entire identity around being needed, being the helper, the listener, the fixer, the emotionally available one. And when your worth is tied to how much you give, choosing yourself can feel like losing yourself. So healing becomes deeply uncomfortable at first. The empath starts noticing how exhausted they really are. Not physically, emotionally exhausted from years of overextending. Themselves for people who rarely asked how they were doing, emotionally exhausted from shrinking themselves to avoid conflict, from over-explaining boundaries, from carrying conversations, relationships, families, friendships, and emotional burdens that were never meant to belong to them. And suddenly they begin asking questions they avoided their whole life. What do I actually feel? What do I actually want? What kind of love do I deserve? Those questions sound simple. But for an empath, they can feel revolutionary, because many empaths spent years disconnected from their own needs. They became experts at understanding others while remaining strangers to themselves. Healing changes that. Slowly, the empath begins realizing how many relationships survived only because they kept sacrificing themselves. That realization hurts deeply, because they finally understand. Some people did not love the real them. They loved the version of them that had no boundaries. The version that always said yes, always forgave, always stayed, always understood. But the moment the empath begins changing, people react. Some become distant. Some become angry. Some accuse the empath of becoming selfie, weak, or cold. Why? Because boundaries expose relationships that were built on access instead of respect. And this is one of the hardest stages of healing. Watching people become uncomfortable the moment you stop overgiving. The empath starts noticing something painful. The people who benefited most from their lack of boundaries often resist their healing the hardest, because healing changes the dynamic completely. Now the empath no longer tolerates emotional crumbs, no longer chases one-sided relationships, no longer ignores red flags just because they understand someone's trauma. Understanding pain no longer means accepting mistreatment. That lesson transforms everything, because empaths often confuse compassion with obligation. They think, if I understand why someone hurts me, I should stay. Understanding someone's pain does not require sacrificing your peace to it, and healing finally teaches the empath that love without self-respect becomes self-destruction. For the first time in their life, they start listening to their intuition instead of silencing it. That uncomfortable feeling in the chest, they stop ignoring it. That exhaustion after certain conversations, they stop dismissing it. That deep inner voice saying this relationship is draining you, they finally hear it. And slowly, the empath stops betraying themselves. That is real healing. Not becoming harder, not becoming colder, becoming honest. Honest about what hurts. Honest about what drains them. Honest about what they deserve. And many empaths cry heavily during healing because they begin grieving the version of themselves that spent years begging for love through self-sacrifice. They grieve the child who believed being useful was the only way to stay loved. That grief cuts deep, because the empath realizes how often they settled for less than they deserved just to avoid abandonment. How many times did they accept bare minimum effort while giving maximum emotional energy? How many nights they stayed awake overthinking relationships that should have never required so much suffering? Healing forces them to face all of it. And there is anger too. Not toxic anger. Sacred anger. The kind of anger that says, I deserved better than constantly abandoning myself for people who would never do the same for me. That anger becomes fuel, because now the empath starts rebuilding their self-worth from we inside instead of seeking it through being needed. They begin understanding something powerful. Their value does not come from how much pain they can carry for others. Their value exists even when they are resting, even when they say no, even when they stop rescuing everyone around them. And this changes the way they love completely. Before healing, the empath loved through self-erasure. After healing, they love through balance. Now they understand that healthy love does not require exhaustion. Healthy love feels safe, reciprocated, respectful, not confusing, not draining, not emotionally violent. And for many empaths, healthy love initially feels unfamiliar because chaos felt normal for so long. They were used to chasing emotionally unavailable people, used to earning affection, used to surviving love instead of experiencing peace inside it. Healing rewires this slowly. The empath begins choosing relationships where they do not have to beg for consistency, where communication does not feel like emotional warfare, where boundaries are respected instead of punished, where they are loved for who they are, not just for what they provide emotionally. And perhaps the most powerful trauma, NS formation, happens when the empath stops apologizing for existing. That changes everything. No more apologizing for needing space. No more apologizing for emotional exhaustion. No more apologizing for wanting reciprocity. Because healing teaches the empath that their needs are not burdens. They are human. And the healed empath no longer measures love by how much suffering they can survive. They measure it by peace, by honesty, by emotional safety, by mutual effort. Now they walk away faster from manipulation. Not because they stopped caring, because they finally started caring about themselves too. That is the difference. The healed empath still loves deeply, still feels deeply, still understands people deeply. But now there is wisdom attached to their empathy. Now they know not everyone deserves unlimited access to their heart. Now they understand that protecting their energy is not selfish, it is necessary. And perhaps the most beautiful part of healing is this. The empath finally becomes the person they needed when they were younger, the protector they never had, the comfort they never received, the voice that finally says, "You matter too." For some empaths, that sentence became life-changing, because nobody ever told them that before. Nobody taught them they could exist without earning their place through sacrifice. So healing feels like finally breathing after years underwater. The guilt slowly fades. The people-pleasing weakens. The fear of disappointing everyone loses power. And for the first time in their entire life, the empath stops chasing love that cost them themselves.